I am so excited to host this first podcast for 2025. I've really been looking forward to this, and I am so excited because Allison has gracefully, agreed to join this podcast. So I know this was being advertised, and many of you have looked up her background, but Professor Fragale is a brilliant social scientist and teaches everything from negotiation, influencing without authority, developing a powerhouse network, and many other topics. More importantly, she's a master at how these tools can specifically be applied to women. She's a professor at the business school at the University of North Carolina. She's a PhD in organizational behavior from Stanford Graduate School of Business and a BA from Dartmouth College in math and economics. She was management consultant at McKinsey. She lives in Chicago with her husband and 3 children, apparently all of who are named after professional athletes. She loves, in no particular order, cheap coffee, not so cheap wine, fabulous shoes, home organizing, sushi, the Pittsburgh Steelers, Peloton workout, and Hallmark movies. And with that, I am super excited to get into today's topics. And I'm sure all of you have had the opportunity to read through or at least see some of our podcasts and videos on the books that she has written, which I actually read with a lot of interest. It's called Likeable Badass. And so we'll get right into it. If you do have questions, please post them. I will have the opportunity to ask your questions throughout this podcast. So thank you again very much for joining and for coming. And very happy to have you here. So I'll start with your book and this paradox of likability and authority. And you highlight the need for women to balance these 2 characteristics, likability and authority, or what you sort of call care and competence. And when women in the workplace show assertiveness or confidence, they're often labeled as bossy or aggressive, or even worse, the sort of B word. And women are just held to a different standard. And, when we're growing up, advice women are given in the workplace is, be assertive, but not too aggressive, speak up, but don't be too loud, show confidence, but stay humble. So what advice would you give to women who constantly feel that they're sort of walking a tightrope between these 2 characteristics?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. And the book that I wrote is about the science of status, which is something I've studied for the 20 plus years I've been an academic. Status is how much we're respected and regarded by other people. And that's a really important resource for us. Not only does it feel bad to not feel respected and valued for your contributions, but it also sets you up to not be influential, to not gain power, to not be able to navigate your career, lead a happy life. So I talk about how status is this really important resource that I want people to understand where it comes from. And where it comes from, and why I called the book Likeable Badass, is what you referred to. When people respect you when they think you care about them, and they respect you when they think they can rely on you. You're good at what you do. So anytime we can communicate to an audience, whether that's a stranger that we've just met on the airplane, or whether that's my boss or my colleagues, hey, I care and you can rely on me, generally, people respect you. So I talk in the book about the science of why that's harder for women, because status is not something only certain people have to navigate. We all need to be respected. And we all are more respected when we show that we care and that we're very capable. The part for women that's unique, and it's not just women, but is that certain characteristics, we call them ascribed status characteristics, are associated with less respect, like at the starting line. And so if we compare women to men, as an example, generally speaking, all other things being equal, man will get more respect from the beginning than a woman, which is why it's harder. So when people are not as well respected from the beginning, they often get categorized as either capable or caring, but not both, which is why women find themselves in that getting that criticism much more than men do. it's frustrating, it's unfair. I explain the science of why, but to the point of like, what do we do about that? Well, what we try to do is we try to look for as many authentic ways as we can to bring the caring and the competence together by perhaps shifting how we show up in a way that allows us to hit on both. There's a finding in psychology that all human beings have a bad habit. And the bad habit is, if I want you to think I'm really smart, one of the ways I do that is by acting less nice and warm. I might get more serious. I might smile. So you're going to take me seriously because I know what I'm doing. And if I want you to really like me, one of the ways I'm going to do that is by downplaying or minimizing all of my skills and accomplishments. So a lot of times what we see in the science is that people make a choice they don't have to make. They might lean into one or the other and not think about, my goal here is to show both at the same time. I'm really caring and I'm really capable. And what I help people think about is, what are all the variety of authentic ways that I could do that? It could be combining, nonverbals where I'm, smiling and very open with a very quick rapid fire of all the facts of the issue at hand. So people say, you know what you're doing, but yet you have not, you can do all kinds of things. But the key is to have that mentality of, yeah, it's a little bit harder, but the good news for everybody is the research shows how we show up in our interactions has a bigger impact on how much we're respected than any characteristic we bring into the conversation. So even if you start with a bit of a status disadvantage that you don't deserve, it's very overcomable if we show up with some intention.
So what you mentioned in your book that women should sort of start with or demonstrate warmth before asserting authority. And you mentioned this almost like a piggy bank, your small deposits. And can you give examples of how people can do this effectively in informal settings? And, what are sort of verbal, or so you mentioned, one nonverbal sort of smiling and being open. But what are other verbal or nonverbal cues that women can do to project, likability and authority?
Sure. So small deposits, what I refer to that is little things that you can do pretty easily that enable you to show up to your audience as both caring and capable. And so it's not about warmth before assertiveness, but looking for ways to do both at the same time. And oftentimes that's a subtle shift that's not going to cost you more time. If you want to build status with a big audience, you want to be respected by lots of people, they have to you have to shape how they see you, but you can't invest in everybody as if it's, the most important relationship of your life. You don't have time. So a small deposit is something easy. So I'll give you a very specific example. You meet a new person for, let's say, a coffee, and it's a professional meeting. And it's not uncommon in those situations that when it's time to pay for the coffee, both people offer to pay. I'll get it. No, I'll get it. And typically one person might pay for the coffee because there's no need to split the bill, for two coffees. One person pays and you think, I just did a nice thing. That was a warm gesture. Very warm, very nice. The problem with it is it's very forgettable because anyone in that situation likely could have bought your coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, when I start, I meet a lot of new people in my work. And one of the habits that I sort of fell into, but then when I recognized why it worked, I've really emphasized it, is as I listen to people and they tell me who they are and what they're about, my brain just naturally starts thinking like, who else in my network like has a similar story? And I started making offers at the end of these short meetings, coffee meetings, to say, hey, you know who you might really benefit from meeting? So and so that I know. Would you like an introduction? So thinking about an introduction versus buying a coffee, they're both very nice gestures, but the introduction has an additional benefit. And that is it allows you to show up as uniquely capable. I have something special, my relationships in this case,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't take any more time or effort really than buying the coffee. 2-minute email that you send afterward and you've done it and you're out of the way. So that's an example where what I call a small deposit. It's not a lot of effort. If you do it for somebody and nothing comes of it, you don't feel burdened or taken advantage of because it was easy. And you could do it for lots of people and it's unique. So what I always suggest to people is start with like, what do you like to do? Like, do you like connecting people? Do you like, giving people advice? Do you like writing thank you notes? Do you like, using whatever hobby or skill you have outside of work to help people, whatever it is, start with what you like and what you think you're good at. And then think about how could I use that for the benefit of other people? So that's what I mean by, a small deposit, looking for like ways to combine them in ways that are very authentic. And then, in terms of all the other signals, this is where I started doing this work on status, looking at speech styles and nonverbals and all of these things. And gestures that like nonverbals that are confident but not intrusive. So those things tend to convey like I'm friendly and I know what I'm doing. Like as soon as you start to lean too much or invade someone's space, that's not good. So we don't want dominant gestures, we want confident gestures. Um, eye contact is really good. Eye contact when listening says, I care about you and what you're saying. Eye contact when I'm speaking says what I'm saying is important. So you don't want to be staring, but making good eye contact is a signal that we use to show that someone feels confident in what they're saying and they're paying attention to us when we speak. But any given behavior is just a tool in your toolkit to achieve goals. So I talk a lot about the fact that like, I think I look reasonably smiley right now, but I am not traditionally a good smiler. I get comments all the time that I look upset when I am not. And so smiling, which conveys a lot of warmth, isn't that effective for me because unbeknownst to my conscious brain, my mouth is not making very good smiley movements. So everything that you carry with you, like none of it needs to be changed, but you do want to be aware of it such that if you have certain things that are very natural to you that aren't helping you show up as warm and capable, fine. But then what else could you do? What could you add in that would help you, convey it? So I'm not a great smiler, but I am a great complimenter. And so I often, when I meet somebody, I'm good at using my words to say something warm and kind, even though my face doesn't necessarily show it.
That's very helpful. So maybe the the counter of that, so things you can do to appear both caring and assertive. But the other side is how women sort of self-sabotage in some ways, right? I do that with sort of self-deprecating humor a little bit every now and then. But what are ways in which women sabotage themselves and pull back some of that power and that they might have?
Yeah. So, and it's not just women that do this, but I think it can be more costly for women because we don't get that status advantage from the beginning. We don't want to unintentionally do anything, right? So you and I, right, we both have a lot of experience, but still you can find yourself using storytelling behaviors that you think, oh, that may not be serving me well. Um, Self-deprecating humor is an example. It's one that I am extremely guilty of, even at this age. Now, why do people self-deprecate? It's not because they're lack confidence or because they're idiots. No, they self-deprecate because they're trying to be nice. It is a strategy to build warmth. The challenge with it is it's building warmth at the expense of that other important dimension, our capability. So it has a logic to it. The logic just ends up not being as beneficial as we think. Self-deprecation is a form of humor. So a lot of comedians, their whole bit is cutting themselves down. So it's funny, and humor in general is a very warm and assertive act. It's a mark of intelligence to be able to make people laugh, and it's joyous and cohesive. So if humor is your thing and you can lean into it in ways that feel good to you, it's a great thing to do. But when it comes at your own expense, then we're considered the experts on ourselves. So the research shows if you comment, if you like mock your own intelligence, you're seen as less intelligent. If you mock your attractiveness, you're seen as less attractive. So it's well intentioned, but it has a downside. So when we start to recognize how often we do these kind of things, rejecting compliments, I always say that's the worst of the worst, because when you reject compliments, you're considered like incompetent and mean. Because you're telling people you're not good at stuff and they're trying to be nice to you and you're telling them, I don't appreciate your kindness.
Right.
But when we do that, again, we're not trying to do it to hurt a person. We're doing it to be humble. You've
Mhm.
complimented me, and if I reject it, isn't that good humility? It has a logic, but it's not how people receive it. So becoming aware of these things and then thinking about how could I accomplish the same goal without costing myself on one of these dimensions. So in terms of self-deprecation, which I've done a lot, um, oftentimes you want to do it to build somebody else up, to say you're amazing. But we don't have to cut ourselves down as the comparison group, right? Let's say I'm introducing a new person into my team and I want to elevate this person and I want to talk about them. And I could say, thankfully they're here, right? They're so much better than I am. I'm trying to compliment them, but I don't have to do it in that way. I could just
Mm,
say, aren't we lucky to be
mm,
joined by somebody who has such depth of experience, et cetera, to be with our team today? I don't have to use myself. And so when we start to think about our goals, we often can find just a subtle shift that allows us to do the exact same thing we wanted to do while not hurting how we show up in other people's brains.
One of the other things, and again, at AstraZeneca, we have women on every continent, and it's and there's obviously a cultural element to how women are brought up, and women are brought up with a certain sort of set of beliefs, right? You don't want to, you want to be a good person, you don't want to manipulate people. You're told that to succeed, you don't have to care so much about what people think of you. Try to be one of the guys. There's not enough time. All these sort of limiting beliefs. So the question is, how do women get clarity on how they're perceived in the workplace? And you mentioned some of the actions that people can take to correct the unfair perceptions, but how do they also overcome their own limiting beliefs in the workplace?
The best time to earn the respect of someone is when you're new in the relationship and you don't need anything from them. Then you don't have any pre-existing judgments about you need to overcome. And it's joyous to try to build that relationship because you're not so worried about like what you're going to ask them for or what they're going to do for you. It's just easy. So that's the mentality I want people to have is I just want to get into a world where I'm just constantly trying to earn respect of people when I don't really need it. But some of those people I will need for things that I can't even predict will have happened yet. And so if I
Mhm.
just have this way of living that earns me the respect of lots and lots of people, when I wake up today and I have a problem to solve and I'm like, who could help me? I at least know that I have some people I could call in my network who I already have a good relationship with. And a lot of the reasons we might avoid that is sometimes narratives we're told or things we believe. Like if I doubt my own abilities, I may not like do as much to show up as really capable in your eyes because I don't believe it. So, um, I think first is some self-examination and self-awareness combined with some feedback. This is where I think mentorship or friends or advice network is really, really important to be able to understand how we show up. So I'm going to give you a specific example from my life. I when I wrote this book, Likeable Badass, I write the entire thing, first draft, and I send it to my editor. Now, my editor has purchased this book and believes in it, but she doesn't actually know me. I'm a complete stranger to her when I sell the book. So when I send the book to her, she reads it. The biggest piece of feedback that came back after reading that was, oh my goodness, Allison, look how much you are cutting yourself down, self-deprecating. Allison, these people who read this book are not your best friend. People want to read books from experts. You cannot be, even as a joke, undermining your own credibility as you write this book. And so she points out like here, 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 here. Now, I had some awareness that I did that. But I didn't realize how I was coming across at all until I wrote it down on a piece of paper. And essentially a stranger commented on how much it was affecting my expertise. And it was only in that feedback moment that I could see it. And so if I had lacked that feedback, or if those kind of things had been happening verbally, one meeting at a time and no one said anything, I might be getting some feedback that, Allison, you don't show up as very authoritative. And I would have thought, what do you mean I don't show up as authoritative? And I would have had no knowledge that I was doing that. So feedback's going to be really important, but we have to create a context in which people feel like they can give that feedback. An editor is a very specific thing. Their literal job is to
Mhm.
give feedback. But in most relationships at work, that's not really our job. So licensing it, telling people you want it, seeking it out, being really receptive with it. And I always say, if you do not want people saying bad things about you behind your back, make it easy for them to say bad things about you to your face.
Mhm.
That if they can start to feel like they can have a dialogue with you, they're much more likely to tell you things, and then you're much more likely to improve.
That is, building that sort of your support group that'll tell you, where you're lacking and where you can improve and how you're being perceived is really important. At AstraZeneca, we're viewed as very collaborative. People work across a lot of different groups and functions and so forth, which that level of collaboration is obviously required to do what we do. But there are times when conflicts come up and disagreements happen. So what are some of the techniques that women can use to de-escalate conflicts while standing their ground and maintaining authority, and not getting unfairly labeled as, oh, this person's really difficult, or this person's really, emotional. So what can women do to approach? I mean, you teach negotiations, obviously, as as part of your courses. What can women do to de-escalate conflicts and navigate these conflicts constructively?
20 plus years of teaching negotiation and influence is really what brought me to working with women, as women like had struggles navigating either advocating for themselves or conflicts. And so the advice that I give is the same advice I'd give to everybody, but obviously for women, particularly important because we don't want to be seen as not warm enough or not, assertive enough. I always think of conflict is a problem to be solved, not a battle to be won. So when you think about people who are really good at navigating conflict, have good fundamental negotiation skills, which is, I would say a conflict is like a jigsaw puzzle or a Sudoku puzzle, right? There's a way to solve it, but I just can't like fit the pieces together right now. And I think if you can approach a conflict with curiosity, which is, what resolves conflicts? Giving people what they want. So if you can figure out with curiosity, what do you really want out of this situation? Like, what do you have to have and what could you give up? And what does the other person really want? Then you can start to figure out like how the pieces might fit together. Sometimes conflicts are going to have a winner and a loser, and there's no win to have, right? There's no solution. But that doesn't happen as often as we think it does, because we often will then start to use power to say, hey, guess what? Like at the end of the day, I'm going to get my way because I'm more powerful than you are. And we force a solution that leaves people unhappy. So what I would say to all human beings is if whenever you see a conflict happening, whether you're part of it or not, get curious about it and say, what is each side saying that they really want? And is there some creative space to figure out how everybody can have what they want? If so, the conflict will resolve. But that requires some curiosity, some good question asking, and to see conflicts as problems to be solved, puzzles to be solved, rather than battles. And I think that mental shift changes how people show up in it in a way that leads them to be more productive.
Just going back to the same sort of sub question that was there around emotions, right? So
Yeah.
women are, generally viewed as more emotional, and emotions, particularly, in a workplace, can be perceived as a weakness, and men are considered as more brave because they will have less of an emotional response to whether it's conflict or any sort of people issues and other things. How should what are tools or techniques that women can use to not get that, not have emotions come in the way, but also not it being perceived as a weakness?
Yeah. So typically we think about these things in terms of negative emotions, right? I'm angry, I'm sad, those kind of things. So there's a couple of thoughts. One is, look, people generally don't like interacting with unhappy, angry people, right? Just human beings don't. Anger can be a good tool to get somebody to concede to you. We see that in negotiation, but they don't like you as much going forward. And if in the future they can avoid you, they will. So that's just a human reaction. One of the things that human beings do, and I think women do this to a greater degree, is we wait too long to advocate for what we want. We don't like advocating for what we want, whether that's my own career advancement or whether that's for an idea that I really care about in my team. I kind of sit back and say, I'm not sure this is going my way, but let's just see what happens. And we wait and we wait and we wait until it becomes very clear that we are not going to get what we want. And then we need to step up and say something. So I always say to people, the easiest way to not come across as angry is to not actually be angry. And the way that you can not be angry is you can start these conversations a lot sooner. If you start advocating for yourself and your ideas before any decisions are made, there's nothing to be angry about. It's often, I think, when we wait too long and something's about to happen, and then we really need to stop it or redirect it, that we use anger to try to say, this is not okay. And, we should be able to use anger as well as anybody else, right? But the idea of if we get in a habit of advocating for ourselves all the time, sooner, it's also easier to maintain warmth because we're not frustrated. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So it's not to say that women shouldn't be allowed to be angry or frustrated. They absolutely should be. But a lot of times that's coming from, and I feel this in my own life, when I've waited too long, and the thing I'm talking about now, I was thinking about it 6 months ago, but somewhere in the back of my head was like, maybe it'll just fix itself and I won't have to do anything about it. And that often is just not the case. The other thing I was going to say, about these kind of emotions is, if the only time people see us get mad or upset is when the conversation is considered to be about our self-interest, like it's my
Right.
team or my idea or my career, it does make us look a little bit self-interested.
Yeah.
So I always say, like, if anger, when used, or to advocate for the benefit of somebody else, takes on a totally different perception. So if are seen as really upset because someone else over here is not getting what they need, this team isn't getting the resources,
Right.
et cetera, this person's not getting the respect, you can be angry and it looks very different. Now it's you defending and advocating for other people. So I want people to be aware of this, of what kind of situations does that negative emotion come out. And if you're a person who is a more emotionally expressive person, that's who you are. Don't only do that when it's for your benefit, because people will see it as selfish. If you're starting to do it across the board to benefit others as well, then you get a little more leeway in thinking about your emotions. It can't always just be about you.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch the topic a little bit to sort of this advocating for others. I think it was Taylor Swift who said, or at least it was attributed to her, that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. I don't know if that was her or not, but that's what I heard.
Yeah.
So you've talked in the book and in some of your other podcasts about how women can, how you can elevate your own status while also elevating status for others. And can you share some examples of that? Because obviously that benefits everyone, including yourself. But, can you share some of those examples?
Absolutely. So, this is really important. Our status is built in two ways. It's built through the story we tell about ourselves, because that's how people learn a lot about us. They learn by talking to us, interacting with us, reading our emails, all those things. So if those things are not projecting care and competence, then people won't believe those things about us. But the other way our status is built is through other people, often what people say about us when we're not around. So we learn about people all the time. You're in a conversation and someone, talks about how great someone is, or they say they're not so great. So that I call that other promotion. You have self-promotion, you have other promotion. And one of the things we want to do that's very strategic for ourselves is get other people talking behind our back in positive ways more often. Because when that happens, then we can enter rooms where people have already heard about us. They've heard something positive, and they're already inclined to like us and respect us before we've even done anything. That's such an easier job. Now, in order for that to happen, there's a couple of things we need to do. But one of the things related to your question is, one of the best ways to motivate somebody to talk you up is for you to talk them up first, because human behavior is reciprocated. The good is reciprocated, the bad is reciprocated. So if you find out that I've been telling everybody how awesome you are, you're going to obviously feel a lot of, warmth and respect for me, and you're going to want to return the favor. So if that I always say is if you do one thing and one thing only that would really both benefit you while enabling you to be a woman who supports other women, is simply talk up people who are amazing. So one of the ways I think about this is I have all these thoughts that go in my head, all day, and I'll have a moment where I'll be like, "Oh my God, that person is so great," or "I really like that," or "They're so generous." When I have that positive thought about a person, I try really hard to try to put that out into the world in some way, to tell somebody, to post about it on social, even to compliment them. I try not to just let it be a thought in my head. That
Mm.
person does great work. Let me tell somebody. And if we did that, like I said, if you become an evangelical other promoter, a talker upper of people's great work, it would both be a beautiful way to live and create a world where we all supported each other. And it would be incredibly strategic for building your own status because people would then want to do the same thing for you. So, I understand why it doesn't happen as much for women because women have had to fight harder to get everything they have, and it doesn't leave them as much resources for fighting for other people. But that idea of simply don't let the positive thoughts you have about people die in your head can start to transform how you communicate that information in ways that's good for them and then comes back and is good for you.
And like you said, it's a beautiful way to live, right? To
Right?
build
It's
some
happiness. It doesn't, everyone's like, yes, I can do that. It's fun.
So the same thing, I guess, a little bit, but maybe focused on men. I've got a question here, which says, can you share some advice, particularly for male managers, on how to provide coaching that is authentic, impactful, but also empathetic to the challenges women can face in the workplace? It can sometimes be difficult to do without, sounding patronizing or do any advice?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think everyone has this challenge, even if they're doing coaching with, same gender coaching too, is I want to help you, but I don't want it to be seen like I'm telling you that I'm better than you. So a couple things. I think one is that if it's done in the spirit of, recognizing someone's potential and wanting to increase it, that to be very authentic and honest, which is I see great things in you. I want everyone else to see them too. Like I'd like to be your partner in this. And tell me what I could do that would be most helpful. Like, could I give advice? Could I make introductions? Give that person some say in what they might want and open up that dialogue and then see where they take it. The other thing is that not every, message is best delivered by you. And that to recognize that maybe I'm not the greatest advice giver or mentor. So I'll give you, an example that those of us that are parents can recognize, which is sometimes my kids just don't want to hear it from me. It doesn't mean I'm not right. And it doesn't mean that I don't have their absolute best interests at heart. But you know what? I am just not the messenger that is going to get through. And the best thing I can do is to try to find them a coach, a mentor, an advisor who could mentor them and that they would be really excited to work with and learn from. And as a parent, I don't see any ego in that. I'm like, I get it, right? You're not going to hear this from me. I'm going to set you up over here with someone who will do it and I'll go back to my day. Same thing in our managerial relationships, right? Sometimes we may not be the best messenger. It doesn't mean just like I'm the parent, doesn't mean I did anything wrong. But to offer resources to people to say, what would they like? Would they like an external coach outside the organization so that they might be able to talk really frankly about challenges without worrying it's going to derail their career, or to confess that they feel like they're not good at certain things without having, be labeled that way. So to offer with genuine sincerity, I see your potential. I really want to invest in you. Let me be your partner in telling me what would be most helpful to you so that you felt educated, supported, you got good feedback and advice. Like, what does that look like? And then follow their lead.
All right. So another question that came in, how do you how do you deal with those who decide to talk you down or challenge you all the time?
Okay. So there's a couple options. My favorite one, you're not going to like, but it works really well, which is essentially to lean in. One of the reasons that people often will talk you down or challenge you is because they're insecure about their own standing or position, their
Mm-hmm.
own status, their own power. People who feel very secure in their power or status, they generally are not, they don't behave that way. It doesn't mean that they love you and they're going to elevate you, but they don't feel the need to constantly be in your face telling you that they're better. It comes from insecurity. if someone is insecure, we see in the science, they're going to be more hostile, they're going to be more aggressive, more harassing, all these things. So how do we take an insecure person and get them to stop doing that? You got to make them feel secure. But the
Mhm.
problem is, because behavior is reciprocated, if someone challenges you or talks badly about you, what are you likely to do? Challenge them back, talk badly about them. Well, guess what that does? It only validates that they were right to be insecure because everyone's out to get them. So I
Mhm.
think one of the best things that you can do is to stop that cycle. And you stop that cycle by leaning in. How does that make that person realize that you are their advocate in some way? That can be very difficult for somebody who has behaved in a way and they've made you mad. So I always say, you don't lie, but can you look for anything redeeming about them that's true? And can you then help elevate them in some way? So maybe you could offer a sincere compliment to them. Maybe you could offer a sincere compliment about them to their boss, to their team. Maybe when it's clear they have an idea in a meeting and no one is paying attention, but you agree with it, you could second it and say, I want to amplify that because I think that's a good idea. Looking for opportunities to say, I need this person to realize that I'm not trying to be a threat to them. And when
Mhm.
people feel secure, they start to behave better. Now, I totally understand that is hard to do in practice because reciprocity is so strong.
Mhm.
Um, but it works better than, the attack cycle. I think the other thing is we also have to recognize that there's some relationships that we might decide this is not an important enough relationship in my life that I'm going to make it my life's work to try to turn it around. We can't do that with everyone because we do need the respect of more people than not. But there are going to be some relationships and you're going to say, that's just not going to work. And I have the luxury at this point to not invest in it because I think that the relationships I do have or could build would give me enough respect to be able to live the life I want to live. And I think
Mhm.
that's always a judgment call, but we don't have to go to the ends of the earth to make everybody a fan, but we should be thoughtful and we shouldn't just write people off instantly simply because we're not getting the immediate results we want.
Good advice. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a few personal questions, I
Okay.
guess, if that's okay with you. So in your own life, you talked about the feedback you got from the editor and so forth, but what has been your personal biggest obstacle and how have you overcome that?
So, um, I would say it's not a super sad story, but something that's been challenging to me in my life is I'm married, I have 3 kids. My husband has a career as well. One of the things that has been challenging for me is to try to figure out how to navigate 2 careers that can be rewarding and satisfying to the individual people. And so one of the things that happened with, as we were chatting before, I live in Chicago and my full-time day job is at the University of North Carolina, which is, a good 1,000 miles away. That was a situation that ended up out of our dual career situation. And when I made that choice to prioritize my family, I did so with the recognition that it was taking the career that I currently had built at that point and and changing it in a fundamental way that make it harder for me to be successful.
Mhm.
Um, and so that has been the sort of a challenge. But what that did for me, which is actually, brings me here to you, was that when I made that decision 10 years ago, I started to think about what were the things that I was good at and where I could add value, and that might not have to, be in North Carolina as much and would open me up. And honestly, that move was part of the pivot to serving women as an audience specifically, because I was doing that kind of work. I really, really enjoyed it. And I thought, if I'm going to be in this difficult career situation, what brings me joy and how could I start to do more of that? And so I started doing more work. It's one of where the idea for the book came out of that work for women. And then, I write the book and then that's brought me into play with new audiences. And I do sometimes think about what turns in my life needed to happen for that to be the case. And I think this like difficult dual career of
Mhm.
we've got to, make moves at different points that are really good for one person and much less good for the other person is what got me to doing the things I'm doing today, which I absolutely love. So again, not a terrible story, but that one hit me by surprise. I think like I didn't read that book or the memo about relationships, that you can dual career is very possible, but that dual career of equal satisfaction and equal speed at the same time is not as possible, I think, as it was in my like 15-year-old mind.
Yeah, it does require a big support system. And I guess, if you have that in Chicago, that's, it takes a village to raise a family. So, but I think what I'm hearing is making a conscious choice that, yes, it may be more difficult given your, tenure in North Carolina, but at the same time, leaning into things that you were also good at, where you really enjoyed, and doing both of that. And maybe it would have worked out this way, maybe it wouldn't, but at least you were making a conscious decision, I guess. Is that fair? Because I think a lot of people and a lot of women sort of struggle with this sort of work-life balance, you can call it, or managing all the different priorities that are in their life. And that's always hard.
Yeah, so I talk about this in the book, whether it's related to work life or anything else, that one of the things that I think is really important for all of us that we don't do as much as we should is we need to start at the end with some future vision and then work backward to think about what does that mean for me today. And so we are all such hardworking people who have our whole lives just run faster and faster and faster to do more and to achieve more. And you're so busy that there's no time to look up. And as you know, like years can go by where you're like, I'm doing. And then you look up and you're like, how did I get here? And it's not a bad place to get, but I didn't do it with intention. So I give some exercises in the book to say, if you think about things that you really value that are in the future, it can be helpful. And it serves as a roadmap for today. It serves as a roadmap for all kinds of things, from something like, do I even engage in that conflict with my colleague, or do I just let it go? Or a big decision like, do I move states or not? If you understand what your ultimate goals are, it's easier. And I tell the story in the book that when it comes to thinking about my parenting, I have a very specific vision um, that not all people would share, but it's been really helpful for guiding me as a woman who also works for pay. And that is, I have 3 kids. My goal is to have great relationships with my grown children. Like I want to hang out with them and be buddies with them. And if they have spouses, like be friends with their spouses. So, I hope that happens, but it's a goal. And
Mhm.
so what's been really helpful for me is that vision then helped me make choices that I see a lot of other women struggle with. So one example would be there's often a lot of guilt when you have a young child and you go back into the workforce. I never
Mhm.
really felt guilty because I thought this kid is not going to remember what happens when they're 6 months or a year old, or whether I see them walk or not, or say their first word. If I'm there, of course, but I'm not going um alter my plan for work when they're really little, because that's not part of my particular role. Now, for some
Mhm.
people, those moments might be like the whole thing, and
Mhm.
that's completely fine. But then when it came time to make this move to Chicago, I thought, well, I really like Chicago. And Chicago is a much bigger city in the United States than Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I have a much better shot of my grown children like living near me if I live in this big city. So, okay, I'll take that chance. But all of that decision making was informed by this idea that I had a future goal that I could really specify. And then when I
Mhm.
had these moments that felt hard for a lot of people, I'm like, no, no, no. I don't need to see their first word, but I do need to live in a bigger city where they can get a job. And
Mhm.
so again, people can make very different choices, but when you have that endpoint, then it starts to serve as a roadmap for how am I going to make these trade-offs.
Yeah, no, it's a very good advice. Start with the end goal, and your actions will automatically fall in place. Okay, a few other questions. So women tend not to go for new roles unless they're 100% sure, versus men going into it. So any suggestions on how to overcome the fear and jump in?
Um, I would say you have to jump. One of the things that another friend of mine teaches negotiation. She says it's not your job to do another person's job. So the other person would be like the hiring manager. It's not your job to make a decision for them about whether you're good for this or not. It's their job. So let them do their job, which is your job is to put yourself forward if you want to do it. Their job is to decide, is it a good fit for you? And so you think about it that way, it does feel more freeing of like, yeah, that's their responsibility. That's not mine. So I think that's also uh very helpful. But I talk in the book about things we can practice. We
Mm-hmm.
are very fearful of getting no's. I want
Mm-hmm.
someone to tell me no. Um, Everything is a practice skill, including hearing the word no. So I talk about how can we practice hearing no's, and I give people a task to go out and just get people to say no to you 10 times. One, it turns out to be harder than you think, but two, people start to realize, oh, yeah, that's actually doesn't bother me much at all. So everything is a practice skill. So if the fear of a no is holding you back, go find low risk ways to practice that. So the next time a real opportunity comes in, you're not as afraid of hearing the no. And you're like, all right, that's the worst thing that can happen.
That's great. That's really cool. Um, Another question that's come in, how can I practice these in a safe place? So, like you said, low risk, figuring out what is low risk and doing that. I guess another question from, from a leadership or a manager standpoint, how do we, as manager, make it a safe place for people to take those risks? What can we do better as leaders or as part of executives in the organization, etc.?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple things. One, this is a big theme of my book, and I talk about practicing, and I talk about for every given skill, like kind of low, medium, and high heat practicing of when you're really fearful and or when you're really experienced, how you can turn up the heat. Generally speaking, right, I'm a huge proponent of practice. And if you want to make it low heat, easy, just go to places where you're a stranger, get outside of the work environment, go to places where you'll never be seen again. I think the airport is possibly the greatest place in the world to be practicing any life skill. You can negotiate at the airport because something always goes wrong. You're always sitting next to somebody in the airplane who wants to talk to you, so you can start to like self promote and tell your story and things like that. And then you can never see these people again if you want. Look for opportunities outside of the workplace to practice. It doesn't have to be like if advocating for yourself is something you want to do, you can advocate for yourself at a restaurant just as much as you can advocate for yourself in a work meeting. The context is less important than you practicing the skills and building the context, the confidence. In terms of managers, I mean, I think one, uh, starting to be very, very aware of the signals that you're sending to people when they succeed and fail, right? Because it's very subtle often. Like if I succeed and I get a shout out at the next meeting, and if I fail and everyone's just silent and they're not, they're not criticizing me, but I didn't get a shout out, right? We very subtly learn, right? So becoming aware of this and thinking about if there's something that you're not seeing enough of and you want to see more of it, I've got to start to reward it and make it feel safe. A reward doesn't need to be money, but a reward could simply be a praise, a comment, a shout out, a thank you. But that I think is very important. I think the second thing we can do is to recognize that no matter how much we do as managers, the workplace is never going to feel completely safe. There's consequences, right? My career is going to be here. These relationships matter. So, one of the things we could do as managers is help invest in people and get them those practice experiences outside of the workplace. Like, say, hey, I'm going to send you to training or support whatever it is you have, or thinking about these ways that you can make it safe outside by giving them practice opportunities is equally important to how you lead and show up.
So back to personal question, how do you maintain your personal, mental, and physical well-being, given all the demands that you have between travel and speaking and obviously teaching and three kids and all of that? How do you do it?
Yeah. So, one, I have extremely, extremely good and helpful help, both professionally and personally. And I think that's critical to think. So, one of the things I always think about is like, from the science of delegation. Like, what are the things only I can do, and I do better than anyone else? And I try to keep those things. Like nobody can, even if you know how to do this, please tell me. No one can exercise for me. No one can sleep for me, right? No one can really like, hug my kids and do that, but people can do all kinds of other things. And so outsourcing anything that's not critical, or and not even outsourcing to somebody you pay, but just outsourcing to the rest of my family, who's gonna take what. I think thinking about like aspects of your schedule that work. So um I'm a morning person, so I try to kind of schedule my work and things that are important to me so that I protect my morning for things that really require like good energy, and I try to push toward the end of the day things that
Mhm.
I can do even when I'm more depleted. And then I think just figuring out um like what's your pace. So an example for me is I run a certain pace. That pace works for me. um,
Mhm.
I can sustain it. I can tell from my friends that I'm faster than some of them and I'm slower than others. Meaning, I have friends that like get up and if they do like one thing a day, they're like, "Oh, I'm spent." And I'm like, "Is that all you did all day?" But I have other friends that I think do 10 times more than I do all day, and I don't understand how they're still standing. Everyone has their pace. And so I try to be aware. When I launched the book in the fall, the pace got out of control. There's a lot of demands, and it's like all beautiful work and joyous work, but the pace was a lot. And I ended the year 2024 feeling very off balance and very depleted. And so my goal for 2025 was to say, okay, you've got to figure out what's your pace, which means like not saying yes to everything, saying no to some things, et cetera. But I find this out through trial and error. Like when the pace gets
Mhm.
too fast, you can feel it, and then to figure out how to slow it down. But this is where I also feel like the end goals are really important, because when you have to start saying no or doing one thing but not another thing, it
Mhm.
creates guilt and anxiety of, is that a mistake? But if the end goals are clear, then it makes it easier to say, nope, if something has to be prioritized, I have confidence that I'm picking the right thing.
Mm. Um, do you think there's another question that come in. Do you consider having a mentor or a coach to be essential?
Yes. So uh I talk about this about in the book, and there's a TED talk that I'll encourage everyone to watch. I would say at every stage of one's life, one should have mentors and one should be mentoring. Both of those things are true. Either if you're starting your career or you're, retiring tomorrow. What the TED talk is by Dr. Atul Gawande, who has written several books that are very, very successful, and they're great if you haven't read him. He did a TED talk called Why Everyone Needs a Coach. And the analogy I think is apt is, if you heard about an athlete that had 8 coaches, you would think that's an elite athlete. But if
Mm-hmm.
you heard about a manager that had 8 coaches, you would think that person is basically one day away from being fired. And so we have a mentality in athletics that coaching is part of a lifelong development, and a mentality in all other work that coaching is only for people who aren't good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true, right? Because we need feedback, right? And we need to be able to be better tomorrow than we are today. We're not done. So looking for mentors, and my big speech is that mentor doesn't have to be a single person, and for most people is not a single person. It's a whole host of people that we are learning from, and that some
Mm-hmm.
of those people we know, some of those people we don't know. We're just reading their stuff, observing them from afar, and for many of those people, they don't even know that we consider them a mentor, but we know.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about that. And then the other thing is, a lot of people think they're too young and too inexperienced in their career to advise anyone else. And I'd say that's absolutely not true. Everyone's an expert in something. If anything, anybody can make an introduction, anybody can have an outside perspective. Everybody has skills. I mean, and I always joke, like when my phone does something weird, I don't even try. I just hand it to one of my teenage kids and I say, "Can you fix this?" And of course they can fix it. And so if the mentality of, even as a teenager, things other people don't, um, starts to set you up to look for ways that you can not think about it as being better than other people, but just thinking about how you can add value to your life. But why everybody needs a coach is a 15-minute TED talk that I think is worth everyone's time.
Absolutely. Well, this has been really, really great. I very much enjoyed it, and I will definitely watch that TED Talk. And for all the people listening, I'm sure you've learned a lot. And do go, pick up that book, listen to those TED Talks, listen to the podcast, because Allison has a lot of great advice to share. So thank you very much, Allison, for doing this. I know it's early morning your time, but good to know you're an early morning person.
That's
So
right.
we tapped you at the right time, and wish you all the best and all the success and all the happiness.
Perfect. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you so much.